I carried the sweet potato pie my late husband loved most into my son's Christmas dinner, hoping for nothing more than one quiet evening with my family. My daughter-in-law smiled at me, set a paper plate down on a folding tray in the corner of the room, and said, "You're older now, Mama. Something light is better for you." On that paper plate sat a cold chicken sandwich and a plastic cup of water. My son lowered his eyes and kept cutting his roast as if he had heard nothing at all. I set my purse down on the table, and all at once, nobody in that beautiful room had any appetite left. This story begins at a Christmas table, but it does not end the way you would expect. Before we go any further, do something for me. Leave a quick comment and tell me what the weather is doing where you are right now. I read every one of them, and your voice matters to me more than you know. And a small note before we begin. Some of the details in this story have been shaped for reflection and for storytelling. What matters is the lesson it carries. At 68 years old, I had learned that the most important decisions get made in the dark hours before anyone else is awake to tell you what they will cost you. The clock on my kitchen wall read 4:13 in the morning when I measured out the butter. The little yellow light above my counter was the only light awake in the whole building. Outside my window, the historic squares of Savannah still slept under a soft December fog, the live oaks heavy with moss, the street lamps burning low. I had built a commercial real estate company from nothing across 4 decades. Shopping centers, mixed-use developments, whole corners of this state that used to be empty lots. And I had buried the only man who ever truly knew who I was. Now here I stood awake before the world, making the pie that Nathaniel loved best. The butter had to sit until it was soft, never melted. The sweet potatoes had to be roasted whole and scooped by hand, never boiled. The nutmeg went in after the vanilla, never before it. I had spent 35 years perfecting this recipe through trial and failure, and Nathaniel's patient face every single time I got it almost right. He used to tell me he believed in only 3 things. Kindness contracts you actually read before you signed them, and a good dessert at the end of a hard day. I creamed the butter and the sugar until my wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the bowl in a rhythm I could have kept in my sleep. The smell of nutmeg and brown sugar filled the small kitchen. It filled the corner where his coffee mug used to sit. It filled the space beside the sink where he used to stand and dry the dishes while I washed them, the two of us talking about nothing and everything at the same time. Today was exactly 1 year since he died. Nathaniel passed on Christmas Eve of last year, the 24th of December, with his hand in mine and the hospice light turned down low. A whole year had gone around, and here I was again with flour on my hands on the anniversary of the worst morning of my life, baking as if baking could carry a message across whatever distance now stood between us. The phone call had come the week before. Camille's voice bright and certain the way it always was. "You absolutely have to come, Mama. We are hosting Christmas Eve this year for the whole family." I folded the sweet potato into the batter with slow, careful strokes. Too rough and it breaks apart. Too gentle and it settles to the bottom and never lifts. Nathaniel taught me that with his own hands standing behind me in a kitchen 60 years ago when I was 15, and he was 17, and neither of us had said the word love out loud yet. The pie went into the oven at 447, 350 degrees, exactly 50 minutes. I set the timer and washed my hands. Then I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator, the one where I keep the things that actually matter. The envelope inside was thick and cream-colored and expensive. Foster Reed and Vance was printed across the top left corner in raised letters you could feel with your thumb. Inside were documents I had signed 3 days earlier on the 21st of December in Adrian Foster's office downtown with the winter light coming gray off the river. Every page notarized, every clause exact. I had been carrying that envelope for 3 days. I had planned to wait until after Christmas to use any of it. I held it in both hands for a moment. The paper was heavy, the kind that does not fold easily, the kind that is meant to last. Then I set it into my purse, closed the drawer, and checked the timer. 31 minutes left. The pie came out perfect. Golden across the top, the edges just barely darkened the whole kitchen, smelling like every good memory I had left. I set it on the wire rack to cool while I showered and dressed, and by the time I had wrapped it in the white bakery box I keep for occasions like this one, the fog outside had begun to lift, and the sky over Savannah had gone the pale silver of a coastal morning. The drive from my apartment in Savannah out to St. Simon's Island took a little over an hour. That gave me a little over an hour to decide whether tonight would be the night I finally stopped pretending. The causeway ran out low over the marsh, the water flat and shining on both sides, the tall grass gold and bending. My son and his wife lived on the south end of the island now in a house behind a low brick wall and a row of palmettos, glass and white stucco, facing the sound, close to $3 million of it, catching the light. A tall Christmas tree stood in the front window, lit with what must have been 1,000 small white bulbs. Through the glass, I could already see people moving, and I could hear faint and expensive a live jazz quartet playing something seasonal. I parked in the circular drive behind a black SUV and a Mercedes. The pie box sat on the passenger seat beside my purse, and I could feel the weight of that cream envelope inside the leather pressing against my hip like a stone. Camille opened the door in a deep gold dress that probably cost more than my first car. My daughter-in-law, of 15 years. She took the pie box from me with 2 fingers, the way a person takes a wet umbrella they did not ask you to bring. "Mama, you did not need to bring anything," she said, her smile wide and white and practiced. "We already have dessert handled." She turned and handed the box to a young woman in a black uniform I had never seen before in my life. "Don't put this one out," she murmured, and the woman disappeared toward the kitchen with my pie. Inside the house smelled like pine and like money. The jazz quartet sat in the corner of the great room playing for a dozen guests I did not recognize, colleagues of my son's and friends of Camille's people. I would meet once tonight and never see again. A young man in a white jacket stood behind a bar cart pouring champagne into tall crystal flutes. Camille touched my elbow and steered me toward the dining room. "We are doing something a little more intimate this year," she said. "Just an elegant sit-down." The long table was set for 11, white linen silver candlesticks burning tall place cards in little gold frames handwritten in gold ink. At each setting sat a plate of standing rib roast sliced thin and pink at the center with roasted vegetables arranged like a painting beside it. The crystal caught the candlelight. The silver rested at precise angles. 11 of these settings, one after another, down the beautiful table. And then off to the side against the wall by the window, there was a folding tray, a metal folding tray, the kind you eat off of alone in front of a television. On it sat a paper plate. On the paper plate sat a cold chicken sandwich, white bread, no plate warmer, no roast, no candle, no place card, no name. Beside it, a plastic cup of water. I stood there and I looked at it. The jazz quartet finished one song and slid into another. Someone laughed in the other room. The man at the bar cart shook a cocktail shaker in a slow, lazy rhythm. Camille appeared at my shoulder. "We thought you would be more comfortable with something light, Mama," she said, and she said it loudly enough to carry across the room, meant for the guests now filing in and finding their seats. "Older folks really should eat lighter in the evening. It is so much better for the digestion." Wendell Grant Camille's father, a retired judge who had spent close to 30 years on the bench, sat near the head of the table beside his wife with a glass of wine he had not yet touched. Loretta Grant Camille's mother wore pearls that matched her daughter's and smiled politely at nothing in particular. The other guests found their gold-framed cards, pulled out their chairs, unfolded their linen napkins into their laps. My son Andre, 46 years old, sat at the head of the table and did not meet my eyes. He picked up his knife. He began to cut his roast into small, careful pieces. He did not look up. I looked at that paper plate. I looked at my son. He did not look back at me. And I understood something in that moment, not just about tonight, but about a long time now. He knew. He had known exactly what his wife was planning, and he had walked into this room and sat down at the head of this table anyway. I did not sit down. Andre set his knife on the edge of his plate with a small, soft clink. Camille's smile widened just slightly at the corners. The guests who had been watching me now found somewhere else to look at their roast, at their wine, at the candlelight moving on the silver anywhere at all, except at the old woman standing beside a folding tray with a cold sandwich on it. But I was not thinking about the sandwich anymore. I was thinking about 3 days ago, the 21st of December. I had driven out to the island that afternoon to pick up a box of ornaments I had left in their guest room the week before, old glass ones that had hung on mine and Nathaniel's tree for 40 years. I rang the bell twice and got no answer. The front door was unlocked the way it usually is out there during the day, so I let myself into the front hall, and I heard voices from the kitchen. Camille's voice, bright and certain as always. I stopped in the hall where the tile met the wood, and I stood very still and I listened. She cannot keep making these decisions on her own, Andre. She is 68 years old. We just need a doctor to put it in writing, that is all. Cognitive decline. It is a kind word for it. Once the court signs off on the conservatorship, everything runs through us. The company, the accounts, all of it. We would just be protecting her from herself. It is really for her own good. I stood in that hallway and I felt the floor tilt very gently under my feet. Conservatorship. My son's wife wanted a judge to declare that my mind was failing so that a court would hand her the keys to everything Nathaniel and I had built across 47 years. And then I heard my son's voice. One word. I waited for the argument. I waited for the pause. I waited for my boy, the boy I had raised, to say something, anything that sounded like the man his father had been. And what he said was yeah. Not a question, not a protest, not even a breath of hesitation. Agreement. I stood there for 10 full seconds. Then I turned around and I walked back out the front door, and I climbed into my car, and I left the ornaments right where they were. I drove the hour and change back to Savannah with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart doing something I did not have a name for yet. I sat down at my own kitchen table with my phone in my hand, and I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number Adrienne Foster had given me 2 years earlier, when her firm closed the sale of the last shopping center I ever built. "You call me if you ever need anything at all," she had said. So I called her. That was 3 days ago. Now standing at this table with a dozen strangers pretending very hard not to stare at me, I watched Camille lean toward her mother and whisper something behind her hand. Loretta nodded without quite meeting my eyes. Wendell cut his roast into smaller pieces and studied his plate. Camille raised her voice again just enough to carry over the music. "Mama has always been so particular about eating light. Haven't you?" "Mama, I said nothing at all. There is a particular kind of person in this world who always has the explanation ready before you have had the chance to object to anything. It is the most careful kind of person there is. The one who has already decided what you need, what you want, and what is best for you, and who has wrapped it all in words so reasonable and so gentle that to disagree makes you sound like the unreasonable one. To push back makes you sound ungrateful. To set a boundary makes you sound cruel. I had met this kind of person before. I had been the mother-in-law of this kind of person for 15 years. In 2010, Camille and Andre had been married 1 year. I came out to help with something and found that the good china the set Nathaniel's mother had left me, gold-rimmed and older than either of them, had been packed away into boxes in the garage. "It just does not really go with the new look, Mama," Camille had said, her hand light on my arm. "You understand, I know you do." In 2015, I took the children to the pier for the afternoon. Imani, 5 years old, then asked me why I did not come around more often. Before I could open my mouth to answer, Camille appeared beside us out of nowhere. "Grandma is retired now, baby," she told her voice soft as anything. "She is not as busy as she used to be, so she likes her quiet time." I had sold my last property that same year for more money than that whole pier was worth. I had been on 3 foundation boards and walked 4 miles along the marsh every single morning. I said nothing. I bought both children ice cream, and I smiled. In 2022, Camille and Andre came to my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon and sat in my living room and explained to me gently that they thought it was time they started taking over some of the bigger decisions now that I was getting up in years. Nathaniel was still alive then. He was resting in the next room because the hospice nurse had just left and he had a few weeks left in this world, and I sat on my own sofa in my own home and listened to my daughter-in-law tell me not to worry, that they would handle everything from here. Every single time the explanation came before I could object. Every single time it arrived with a smile, a hand on the arm, a voice that told me this was kindness, this was care, this was simply what I needed, whether I knew it or not. And every single time I had listened. I had been raised to believe that listening quietly is what a good woman does. That family peace matters more than being right, that you never ever make a scene. I had listened for 15 years. Tonight I was going to teach a different lesson. Camille was telling some story now, something about a friend's mother-in-law who also preferred to eat light in the evenings. And her mother laughed politely, and Wendell gave the small, careful laugh of a man who spent 30 years on a bench learning how to smooth over an uncomfortable room. The smell of the roast hung rich in the air. The candles had burned down a little in their silver holders. The quartet moved from one carol into another, something slow with the piano leading. I looked at that paper plate one last time. The cold sandwich, the plastic cup, the folding tray set against the wall like an afterthought, like a thing you set out for someone you had already decided did not quite belong at the table. Then I looked at my son. He was cutting his roast into pieces so small a toddler could have managed them, and he had not looked at me one single time since I walked into this room. I set my purse down on the empty chair, the one chair at the table where I was supposed to have been sitting all along if my daughter-in-law had not decided otherwise. I did not sit. I set the purse there to make room to prepare. I opened the clasp. The small metal sound of it carried into the space between Camille's words, and she paused. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to her father, then back to me. I reached inside and I drew out the cream envelope. Foster, Reed, and Vance in raised letters across the top left corner. Thick paper, the kind that does not bend. I set it down on the white linen right in the center of the table where every person there could see it. Camille saw it. Her smile did not move, but something behind her eyes did. She knew that name. Every property owner on this coast knew that name. Foster, Reed, and Vance was the firm you called when you wanted something done correctly, legally, and permanently. It was not the firm you called for a simple will or a parking ticket. It was the firm you called when you needed something that could not be undone. I looked around the table. A dozen faces, some still chewing, some frozen with a fork, halfway lifted, some with a wine glass, stopped partway to a mouth. I would like everyone to set their forks down for a moment, I said. My voice was calm and quiet. It was the same voice I had used to close deals worth tens of millions of dollars. The same voice I had used to fire a regional manager who had been stealing from me, the same voice I had used to tell a hospice nurse that yes, I understood, and yes, I would like to be alone with my husband now. The room went still. The jazz quartet played on for 3 more seconds before the man on the upright bass caught some signal from my son's hand, and they fell silent in the middle of a phrase. A dozen people sat with forks halfway to their mouths, or already lowered all of them, staring at the cream envelope resting on the white linen in front of me. Camille's smile had still not changed, but her knuckles where they gripped the stem of her wine glass had gone white. Camille was the first to break the silence because that is what people like her do. They speak before you can, so that the shape of the conversation belongs to them. "Mama," she said, and her voice had softened into something warm and worried, a public voice, a voice for the guests. "This is really not the time or the place. Whatever this is, we can sit down together after the holiday and talk it through as a family." "No," I said. Just the one word, quiet and even. It was the same word my son had refused to say 3 days ago in that kitchen when his wife described taking my mind away from me in a courtroom. Camille's mouth closed. Her smile stayed exactly where it was, but something behind her eyes shifted and went cold, and I understood that she had expected tears from me, or anger, or an apology for making a scene at her beautiful table. I was not going to give her any of those things. 15 years, I said, and I let the number sit in the room before I went on. In 2010, you packed away Nathaniel's mother's china because it did not go with your new look. I drove home with those boxes in my trunk, and I put them in a closet where I would not have to see them, and I said nothing. No one at the table moved. The candles had burned down another 1/4 inch. In 2015, you told my grandbabies that I was retired and not as busy as I used to be, so that they would understand why their grandmother did not come around. I had just closed a deal that year larger than this house. I sat in that ice cream line and I said nothing. Wendell Grant set his wine glass down very carefully. His hand was steady. 30 years on the bench had taught him how to keep his hand steady. His eyes were not. In 2022, I said you came to my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon and told me it was time you took over the big decisions because I was getting up in years. Nathaniel was in the next room. The hospice nurse had left an hour before. He had 3 weeks to live, and I sat on my own sofa, and I listened, and I said nothing. I looked at Camille then, and I kept my eyes on her. You have had 15 years of my silence, 15 years of my politeness, and you made the same mistake so many people make. You mistook both of those things for agreement. The room was so quiet I could hear the wax moving in the candles. Tonight, I said, I stand, I read, and all of you sit and listen. It is a small, fair, reciprocal arrangement. I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick and cool between my fingers. I unfolded the pages inside, printed on Foster, Reed, and Vance letterhead, signed at the bottom in Adrian's precise hand. And I began to read in the voice I used to close contracts, because that is exactly what I was doing. "This house," I said, and I looked up once so that everyone understood I meant the walls around us, the glass, the marsh view, all of it. "This house was purchased 4 years ago with a private loan, not a bank loan, a loan from me secured by a deed of trust recorded with the county. My name is on that instrument as the lender. It has always been on that instrument." Camille's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. The terms required monthly payments. Over the last 14 months, those payments stopped coming. First one, then several, then all of them. As of this fall, the loan is in default by a significant margin. I turned to the second page. On the 21st of December, 3 days ago, my attorney recorded a notice of default and began the foreclosure process under Georgia law. I let the word foreclosure settle in the air like smoke over the table. Wendell's head came up. He knew what recorded meant. He knew what non-judicial foreclosure meant. 30 years on the bench, and he understood exactly what kind of machinery had just been set in motion at his daughter's dinner table. I want to be very clear about what that does and does not mean, I said, because I am not a cruel woman, and I wanted no confusion in that room. It does not mean you lose this house tonight. The law requires the sale to be advertised in the county paper for 4 consecutive weeks before it can take place. You have time. What it means is that the clock has started, and it started 3 days ago while you were choosing what to serve me on a paper plate. Camille set her wine glass down. Her hand was steady, but the smile had finally slipped from her face. What was left underneath it was harder and older, and had always been there. You cannot do that, she said. I already did, I said. On Monday, while you were deciding on the folding tray. I turned to the next page, and my voice did not change. There is more. My company owns the commercial building on Newcastle Street where Andre's restaurant group operates its flagship. I looked at my son for the first time since I had begun to read. He was staring at the roast he had cut into such small, careful pieces. That lease is also in arrears, and there is a separate note, a business loan I extended to help the restaurant group expand, signed by you, Andre, 4 years ago. Do you remember signing it? My son said nothing. His hands were flat on the linen on either side of his plate. I will take that as a yes, I said. That note has not been paid either. Not one payment against the principal in 4 years. I set that page down, and I looked only at Camille now because the next thing was for her. But I want to talk about something that was never mine to loan and never yours to touch, I said. Nathaniel's records. Camille went very still. Everyone at the table who had ever been in this house knew about the records. My husband had spent 40 years collecting original master recordings, jazz, mostly some of them the only copies left in the world of sessions that were never released. He kept them in the climate-controlled room off the study. When he died, he left them to me, and I left them exactly where they were, because moving them felt like moving a part of him. This past summer, I said a private auction house in Atlanta contacted my attorney's office. They had been approached with several of those recordings and asked to broker a sale. Before any reputable house sells a collection like that, they verify provenance. They confirm who actually owns it. And the collection is appraised and insured under my name and has been since the estate settled. So when they ran the provenance, my name came up and they made a phone call exactly as they are supposed to. I looked at Camille. You sold 4 of them. Without asking me, without telling me, without telling your own husband. Andre's head turned. For the first time all night, my son looked at his wife. Not the way a husband looks at the woman he loves. The way a man looks at a stranger who has been living in his house. Camille, he said very quietly. What did you... Not now, she said, and her voice came out sharp and final, the voice of a woman who had been in control of every room she walked into for a very long time. But control is not the same thing as ownership. I had spent 47 years learning that difference, and she was about to learn it in a single evening. There is one more thing, I said, and this is the one that matters most, so I want you all to hear it plainly. I looked around the table at the frozen forks and the untouched wine, and the dozen strangers who would carry this story out into the world tonight, whether I wanted them to or not. 3 days ago, I did not only sign papers about this house, I signed papers about my own mind. I let that land. Because 3 days ago, I stood in the hallway of this house, and I heard my daughter-in-law describe a plan to have a judge declare that I am no longer competent to manage my own affairs. A conservatorship. She wanted a doctor to write down that my mind is failing so that a court would put her in charge of everything my husband and I built across 47 years, and I heard my son agree to it. A woman in a green dress 2 seats down drew in a breath she could not quite hold. Wendell Grant's face had gone gray. So on Monday morning, I continued, before I did anything else, I sat for 4 hours with an independent neuropsychologist. A full evaluation. Memory, reasoning, judgment, orientation, all of it. That evaluation, signed and dated and notarized, concludes that I am of entirely sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs. It is now on file with my attorney. In the same appointment, I executed new powers of attorney, financial and medical both, and I removed my son from every one of them. I looked at Camille, and I almost felt something like pity watching her do the arithmetic. So if you file your petition, I said, and I suspect the paperwork is already sitting on someone's desk, it will land in front of a judge on top of a clean bill of cognitive health from a licensed specialist dated the same week. No court in this state is going to take my company away from me on your word against that. Your plan died on Monday morning. You just did not know it yet when you set out that paper plate. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Wendell Grant stood up. He did not stand quickly. He stood the way a man stands when he has made a decision, and he wants every person in the room to see that the decision is final. 30 years on the bench had taught him how to make a movement mean something. He looked down at his daughter. "None of us knew about that folding tray," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried into every corner of the room. "Your mother and I walked in tonight and saw 11 place settings and 1 paper plate on a TV tray in the corner, and we did not understand what we were looking at until Denise stood up." Camille opened her mouth. No sound came out of it. "And now I am hearing," Wendell went on, and his voice caught for just a second, "that you tried to have a court call this woman senile so you could take her business. A woman who has never been anything but generous to this family." It was Loretta who said the next thing, and she said it so softly that I almost missed it. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her daughter, and her face had the look of a woman finally saying a thing she has carried for years. "This is not the first time, Wendell," she said. "You know it is not the first time. We watched her do a version of this to Gerald before Andre. We told ourselves we were wrong about it. We are not going to tell ourselves that again." Wendell turned to me. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, and he used my married name with a care that told me he meant it. "I served alongside your husband on the Regional Arts Council for years. Nathaniel was one of the finest men I ever knew. I am ashamed of what my daughter has done tonight, and I am ashamed that it took your standing up for me to see it." He looked back down at Camille one last time. "We are leaving." He picked up his wife's coat from the back of her chair. Loretta rose. She did not look at her daughter. She smoothed her dress, gathered her purse, and walked toward the front hall, and Wendell followed her. For a moment, no one else moved. Then Camille's sister stood, then her brother, then their spouses. One by one, like dominoes falling in slow reverse, the whole Grant family rose from that table, set down their napkins, and walked out toward the door. No one said goodbye, and then the strangers began to go too, the friends and the colleagues and the people whose names I had never learned, the woman in the green dress standing first, and murmuring that she thought she really ought to be going, and the rest following her in a quiet, embarrassed stream toward their coats. It was into that thinning room that the doorbell rang. I had asked Adrienne to come at 8, and it was 8. The young woman in the black uniform crossed the emptying dining room to answer it, and through the archway I could already see the dark suits in the hall. Adrienne Foster stepped inside 50-something and unhurried a leather folder under her arm. Behind her came Mr. Dawson from the private bank that held the records appraisal on file, and behind him a quiet woman named Mrs. Bird with a notary stamp already in her hand. 3 professionals on Christmas Eve, and unlike everyone else who had come to this house tonight, they had been invited. Adrienne saw me standing at the foot of the table and nodded once. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, and her voice carried into the room where a handful of stunned people still sat. "I want to be clear for everyone present because I can see there may be some confusion. Nothing new is happening tonight. Every document your mother executed took legal effect on Monday the 21st. The notice of default was recorded Monday. The capacity evaluation and the new powers of attorney were executed and notarized Monday. We are here only to hand-deliver certified copies for the record so that no one can later claim they were not properly served." She stepped forward and set 3 cream folders on the table. 1 confirmation copy for Mrs. Holloway, 1 formal copy for Mr. Andre Holloway, and 1 witness copy for the bank. Camille appeared in the archway between the 2 rooms, her gold dress catching the light of the chandelier, her face pale. "It is Christmas Eve," she said, and her voice had gone thin and high. "You cannot just—" Adrienne looked at her the way a senior partner looks at someone who has just said something with no legal meaning at all. Georgia law makes no exception for holidays where service of notice is concerned, ma'am, she said evenly. All of this was properly recorded on Monday. This evening is a formality. She turned back to me. Is there anything else you need from us tonight, Mrs. Holloway? No, I said. Thank you, Adrian. She nodded. Mr. Dawson nodded. Mrs. Bird made a note on her clipboard, stamped a page, and handed a copy to the young woman in the uniform, who took it with shaking hands. Then the three of them walked back out the front door, got into a dark sedan in the circular drive, and drove off into the December dark. I walked back into the dining room. The long table sat wrecked and beautiful, 11 plates of roast gone cold, the candles burned down to stubs, the jazz quartet's instruments abandoned in the corner where the players had quietly packed up and slipped out with the guests. The only people left in that whole grand house were me, my son, his wife, and somewhere down the table, small and silent, my 2 grandchildren. Camille stood in the center of the room surrounded by empty chairs. Her parents' chairs, her siblings' chairs, the chairs of every person she had invited to witness her perfect Christmas. I do not care about destroying you, I said to her, and I meant it as plainly as I had ever meant anything. I keep hearing that word in the way you are looking at me, and it is the wrong word. I do not want to destroy you. I want to take back what I gave in good faith to my son and to his family, and what got used tonight to set a paper plate on a folding tray in the corner while 11 other people ate off good china. I looked at Andre, who had not moved from the head of the table, both hands still flat on the linen, his eyes fixed on nothing. As for what happens after I am gone, I said, and my voice was quieter now, there is a will and there is a trust, and how those read is a decision I will make in my own time with my own lawyer and with my own clear mind. It is not a threat, and it is not a weapon. It is simply mine again the way it should have been all along. That more than any page I had read was the thing that made Camille finally sit down in the nearest empty chair, because she understood at last that there was no version of the next 20 years in which she managed my estate. It was Malik who broke it. My grandson, 8 years old, who had been sitting very still beside his sister the whole time, the way children do when the grown-ups have stopped making sense, and all they can do is watch faces and try to read them. He looked down the long table at me, past all the cold roast and the guttering candles, and in the clear, carrying voice of a child who does not yet know which questions are dangerous, he asked, "Grandma, why do you only have a sandwich?" Behind me, I heard a chair scrape hard against the floor. Andre had stood up, and when I turned to look at my son, his face had come apart completely, the way a face comes apart when a child says out loud the one true thing that all the grown people in the room have been working very hard not to say. He was staring at that folding tray against the wall, at the cold sandwich and the plastic cup, as if he were seeing it for the very first time. As if he had sat at the head of his own table for a whole evening, and only now, from the mouth of his own 8-year-old son, understood what had been done in his house, in his name, with his silence. I did not answer Malik right away. I walked down the length of that ruined table to the corner where my 2 grandchildren sat holding hands under the linen, the way children do when the adults have stopped making sense, and all they have left is each other. Imani, 10 years old, watched me come with her grandfather's eyes, which are my eyes, and said nothing, only waited. Malik, 8, looked up at me with his whole face open, still young enough to ask a question, without knowing it might hurt someone. I pulled out the empty chair beside them, and I sat down. The folding tray was 3 seats away, the sandwich untouched exactly where it had been set an hour ago. "Baby," I said to Malik, "Grandma was given what they decided Grandma deserved, and tonight Grandma showed them they were wrong about that." Imani, 10 years old, and already learning to read the space between what people say and what they mean, looked at me and asked in a small voice, "Are you okay, Grandma?" "Better than I have been in a long time," I said, and I meant every word. I took both their small hands in mine hands, not yet marked by any of the choices their parents had made tonight. "Listen to me," I said. "The pie I brought tonight, the one I started making at 4 o'clock this morning, it is in the kitchen behind the mixer. Before you go to sleep, the 2 of you find it. Eat it on real plates with real forks. That is what your grandfather loved most in the whole world. Not the fancy dinners, not the roast, just a good pie made with care shared with people who matter." Malik nodded very seriously. Imani squeezed my hand. Then I stood up and I walked to the head of the table, to the seat that was not my son's seat anymore, and I did not sit in it. I stood behind it with my purse in my hand. "You have time to sort out the house and the note. I said to both of them, but I was looking at Camille. My attorney will explain the calendar, but I want you to understand one thing before I go. If tonight you had set a plate of that roast in front of me, the way you did for everyone else, all of these papers would still be sitting in my purse until after the holiday. We would have eaten dinner. We would have opened presents. And then quietly, without an audience, I would have handled every bit of this through lawyers, and none of these people would ever have known. I picked up my purse. But you chose a paper plate on a folding tray, so you chose the moment you found out the truth, not me. I walked out of that dining room past the great tree with its 1,000 white lights, past a console table in the hall where a Christmas card stood open in a little gold frame, the family's names printed inside it in gold script. Mine was not among them. I opened the front door. I did not slam it. I closed it gently, the way you close a door when you are not angry, only finished. I drove back to Savannah along the dark causeway with the marsh invisible on both sides and only the sound of the water under the bridge. I did not cry. I had done enough crying this past year. I cried when Nathaniel passed with his hand in mine. I cried the day I packed up the house we had lived in for 28 years, taping boxes alone because my son was too busy with the restaurant expansion to come help me. I cried the first night in the new apartment when I woke at 3 in the morning and reached across the bed for a man who was not there. I had no tears left for a folding tray. I let myself into my apartment a little after 9. I hung up my coat. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window with the small tree I had decorated by myself 3 weeks earlier, its warm yellow lights doubled in the dark glass. And then my phone began to fill up. The first voicemail was from Andre, and his voice was broken in a way I had not heard since he was a boy of 8 and his rabbit died. "Mama," he said. "Mama, please." There was a long pause, the sound of a house moving around him, a door closing somewhere. "Camille has been in the bathroom for an hour. Her parents left. The kids keep asking me what happened. They keep asking me why you only had a sandwich. Mama, I do not know what to do. Please call me." The message ended. I set the phone down. I drank my tea. It had gone lukewarm and I drank it anyway. The second came an hour later, and it was Camille, and every word had been chosen with care the way a lawyer chooses words when she is building a record. "What you did tonight," she said, reading legal documents at a family dinner in front of children, was deeply inappropriate. My parents are extremely upset. I am willing to sit down and talk about some healthy boundaries once you have had a chance to calm down. I know you have been struggling since Nathaniel died, and I want to extend you some grace during this difficult season. A pause. Please think about the example you are setting for Imani and Malik. They need stability right now, not drama. The message ended. I deleted it not out of anger, but out of recognition. She had just watched her whole family walk out of her house and her husband come apart, and she had left me a voicemail about boundaries and my grief and the example I was setting. She had not said the word sandwich once. She had not said the word sorry at all. The third came late, and it was Wendell Grant, his voice gravelly and tired, the voice of a man who spent 30 years listening to people lie and was now working very hard to tell the truth. "Mrs. Holloway, Wendell Grant, I am sitting at my kitchen table with my wife, and we are having a hard and honest conversation about our daughter, one we should have had a long time ago. None of us knew about that tray until you stood up. I want you to know that. I am ashamed in a way I have not been ashamed in many years. Your husband was a fine man, and the protection he built into that deed years ago was the act of a man who understood exactly what kind of thing his family might one day need protecting from. I am sorry. I am very sorry." I listened to that one twice. Not because I did not understand it the first time, but because some apologies need to sit for a while before they become anything else. I saved it. I did not call back yet. I was nearly asleep in the chair when the phone buzzed again past midnight, now Christmas morning by the clock. It was Andre's number, but when I answered, it was Imani's voice, small and careful, the voice of a child calling after everyone else has gone to bed. "Grandma, Imani, are you okay, baby?" "We ate the pie," she whispered. "Me and Malik. We found it behind the mixer like you said. We ate it on the kitchen floor after Mama went upstairs." I closed my eyes. "Was it good?" "It was the best thing I ever ate, Grandma." I heard her take a breath. "Daddy came and sat down on the floor with us. He did not say anything. He just ate the pie with us, and then he hugged us both really tight and he went to his room." My throat closed. "Grandma," she said, Why was Daddy crying while he ate the pie? I opened my eyes and looked at the tree lights blurring in front of me. Because sometimes, I said slowly, grown people need something sweet and something real to help them remember where they lost their way. She was quiet for a moment. Are we still going to get to see you? Mama said maybe we would not see you anymore after tonight. I sat up straight in the chair. Imani, listen to me very carefully. You and your brother are welcome in my home every Saturday for the rest of my life if you want to come. You are always, always welcome. Do you understand me? Okay, she whispered. Tell your brother I said so. Okay, Grandma? Yes, baby. Thank you for calling me back. You called me, I said gently. That took courage. Daddy's phone was on the counter. I just pressed your name. That still took courage, I said. And we hung up. I slept that night deeper and more peacefully than any night in the whole year since Nathaniel died. When I woke, it was mid-morning on Christmas Day, and the apartment was full of that pale, clean coastal winter light, the kind Nathaniel used to say made him grateful to be alive. I knew the way you know things after you have finally done the thing you should have done years ago, that my son would come to me before the day was over. What I did not know yet was whether he would come alone. The doorbell rang at 3 that afternoon, and when I opened it, Andre was standing there by himself in the same clothes he had worn the night before, unshaven, his eyes red, a man who had not slept. Sit down, I said, and I nodded at the little bench in the entry. Let us keep this short at first. He sat. I stood against the wall with my arms folded, not unkind, just waiting. Mama, he said finally, I am leaving Camille. I was not surprised, but I let him say it. When did you decide last night, after you left, after everyone left, she came down from the bathroom and she sat in the living room and she spent 40 minutes explaining to me how she was the victim of your overreaction? He looked at his hands. I have been listening to her build that kind of sentence for 15 years, and last night I finally heard it for what it is. He swallowed. And then late when she thought I was asleep, I heard her on the phone with someone. I do not know who. And I heard her say, when she is older and weaker, that is when the real move happens. He looked up at me and his face broke again. She has been thinking that way about you for years, Mama. And I let her. I never said a word. I did not move. Do you know, I said quietly, how long I have waited to hear you say something like that? I know, he said. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, I can pay it. The house note, the business note, all of it. I will sell my shares in the restaurant group. It will take me a couple of months, but I can make it right. No, I said. He looked at me. I am withdrawing the notice of default. I am telling Adrian to stop the foreclosure Monday morning, and I am forgiving the house loan. You keep this house for my grandbabies, and you keep whatever the shares are worth too, because divorce is expensive and good lawyers cost more than bad ones, and those children are going to need stability that has nothing to do with a courtroom. He stared at me confused, the relief and the guilt fighting on his face. But I said, and I made sure he was looking straight at me when I said it, there is one thing I cannot forgive, and I need you to carry it, because carrying it is the only thing that will keep you from ever doing it again. You sat at the head of that table in your own house eating a fine dinner while your mother stood beside a folding tray with a cold sandwich on a paper plate, and you did not stand up. Not when she took my pie with 2 fingers. Not when she told the girl not to bring it out. Not when she set that tray against the wall and told a room full of strangers that older folks should eat lighter. You cut your roast into little pieces, and you kept your eyes down, and you did not stand up. His face crumpled. I say this not to hurt you more than you are already hurting. I went on, but so that you remember it. Your silence weighed more than anything she did. Because she is a stranger, I have spent 15 years learning to understand. But you are my blood. You are my son. And you chose not to see what was happening until it was sitting on a paper plate in front of a dozen witnesses. Andre put his face in his hands and wept the kind of weeping that comes from the deep place where shame and grief live in the same room. I sat down beside him on the bench, and I did not touch him, and I did not tell him it was okay, because it was not okay, and we both needed to know that. When he finally stopped, he wiped his face with his sleeve. Wendell called this morning. He said, his voice rough. He wants me to bring the kids to him first, so he can apologize to them himself for what their mother did. The kids are coming with me. Camille is going to stay with her parents for now. He paused. Can we come here on Saturdays? The kids want to see you. I told them I had to ask you first. I looked at my son, 46 years old, unshaven and broken, and finally awake. Yes, I said. You can come through the front door with cobbler if you want to bring some, although I will make my own too, just as a precaution. He laughed, a small broken sound, but a real one. I deserve that, he said. You do, I said. I walked him to the door. He paused on the step. Thank you, Mama. For the house. For the kids. For all of it. Do not thank me, I said. Thank your father. He is the one who saw this coming years ago and built the door for me to walk through. Andre nodded and stepped out into the pale December afternoon, and I closed the door gently behind him. I stood alone in my hallway, and I thought about the thing Adrian had told me on the phone that very morning when I was still half asleep. She had one more envelope, one I had not known existed. An envelope Nathaniel had left with the firm years before he died, with a single instruction. Deliver it to her, he had said, only after she has had to use the other one. It was green, Adrian said. Not cream, with my name on the front in his handwriting. She would bring it at 6. The doorbell rang at 6 exactly. Adrian stood on my step. No folder this time, no dark suit, just a woman in a sweater holding a small green envelope. He gave us this a long time ago, she said, and put it in my hands. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Holloway. And then she was gone. I carried it to the reading chair in the corner, the chair I had brought from the old house because it was the one Nathaniel sat in every evening while I cooked reading the paper, or just watching me move around the kitchen. I sat down and I opened it. The letter inside was one page in his careful hand dated June of last year, 6 months before he died. It read, My love. If you are holding this, then it means they have forgotten that you were ever the woman who built the house they are standing in. I cannot be there anymore to remind them, so I have let the law do the reminding for me. I started preparing all of it the year we sold the last property because I watched the way Camille's face changed when you talked about the numbers, and I heard the questions she asked about the estate over Thanksgiving dinner while you were in the kitchen. I know our son. I love our son. And it is precisely because I love him that I know love was never going to be enough to protect him from his own weakness. So I protected you instead. There is one more thing you do not know about. When I set up all the rest, I also set up a separate trust, small but locked irrevocable in the names of Imani and Malik alone, managed independently. No parent can touch it or borrow against it or spend it. It is only for them for school, for whatever kind of life they choose to build. I did it quietly so that no one could talk me out of it or talk their way into it. Now you know? Live well, my dear. Bake many more pies. And remember that our real home was never any building on any deed. It was the thing the two of us made across 47 years, and no one can take that away from you. I love you forever. I folded the letter and set it in my lap and sat very still. I did not cry. For the first time in a year, I smiled. I sat in that chair until the room went dark, and the only light was the tree in the corner and the street lamps outside. Then I got up and I went to the kitchen and I turned on the oven because my husband had told me to bake many more pies, and I was not in the habit of ignoring the man, not even now. While the second pie baked, I took out the small notebook I had kept every single day since Nathaniel died, one line a day, and I opened it to today's page, and I wrote. They set a paper plate in front of me at the Christmas table of the very house I built. So I read them my husband's last gift out loud on cream paper in front of their own family, and then I carried my pie back home. I looked at the words for a while. Then I added one more line. Nathaniel, you were there. You have always been there. When the pie came out, I cut a slice and ate it, standing at the window looking out at Christmas night in Savannah, the lights on every porch, the quiet squares under the old trees. Then I opened the drawer where I keep the aprons, and I took out the small one, the child-sized one I had bought years ago for Imani when she was 5, and asked if she could help me bake the one Camille said would only make a mess, the one that still had the tags on it. I set it on the counter for Saturday, because on Saturday my grandchildren were going to come through my front door, and I was going to tie that little apron on Imani and teach them both to fold the sweet potato in gently so it would not break, and to add the nutmeg after the vanilla never before. I was going to give them the only inheritance that has ever really mattered, which is not a house or a company or a trust that unlocks at 25. It is a recipe and the memory of a man who loved them before they were born, and the knowledge that their grandmother chose her own dignity over her own silence on the one night it counted most. And to you still with me at the end of this, Remember this one thing. For 15 years, I mistook my silence for kindness. I told myself that if I made myself smaller, if I listened more and asked for less, if I ate the sandwich while everyone else ate the roast, I was keeping the peace. Do not make my mistake. Silence in the face of cruelty is not peace. It is permission. And the people who truly love you will never once ask you to disappear so that they can be comfortable. If you have stayed with me this far, I would love to know. What would you have done standing beside that folding tray? Leave a comment and tell me. And if you know someone carrying their own quiet weight in their own family, share this with them. They may need to hear it tonight.